Hey guys, Kevin here. I will be back later this week with another video or two. I've been on vacation and a little busy with work. But in the meantime, I wanted to share a fun new project I've been working on for the past few weeks at my day job at Pioneer Square Labs, which is a AI news podcast. My co-host is Jared, who I've referenced here before as my big brain coworker. He's really great guy and very knowledgeable about AI. And also my coworker Shilpa, who is joining us, former Amazon product manager. And overall, I think it's a really fun conversation. We've been talking about AI, some of the latest stuff that's going on, interesting papers, some observations about the different models. We've even had some special guests from OpenAI and from the Llama team at Meta. And overall, I won't be posting every episode here, but I just wanted to post the latest here. If you guys are interested, go and subscribe. There's links for Spotify and for the Apple Podcast. And hope you guys enjoy it. I will be back later this week with another fun video. But in the meantime, please enjoy Fresh from the Labs, episode 5.
Hi, everyone. We are back with Fresh from the Labs. Super excited to chat with you all today. We actually have a slew of topics to get through, so I'm just going to dive right in. The first one was this interesting research that came out of CMU, where I don't know if everyone saw it, but the researchers effectively constructed this like fake software company entirely staffed with AI agents from different models and then had them do work. And this kind of proving out or potentially disproving this idea of like, could you just have a company run entirely with AI? And the results were not good. The best model had, I think, almost 25% successful completion of tasks, which was Claude 3.5 Sonnet. Everything else was way worse. I think max of 10%, which is a super interesting finding in my opinion. I guess I was expecting it to perform a lot better, but it seems like they just struggled with effectively like common sense things that humans would know. And we're trying to game the system. That was super interesting where one agent couldn't find like the right person to talk to and just renamed another user to be that person. So there was so much wrapped into this research that came out. So yeah, let's dive right in. Kevin, what were your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so a couple things here. I mean, first of all, anytime you see a headline that is like, AI is can never run your company, and look at this horrible thing that happened. You always want to dive in and read the actual paper, right? So did that. And actually, I was expecting it to be a little bit not quite as good as it was constructed. I thought it was actually quite well constructed research. They're using Open Hands, which is like a open source framework for doing agent stuff, because as we know, the subtleties of like your prompts and the way you set things up can be a huge difference, especially if you're getting bad results. I often will really dive in to make sure that they're doing things the right way, to make sure that that wasn't the reason. I will note that they are using Sonnet 3.5 as the best model, right? And it's probably at the time when they did this, it might have been the best available, but we've seen bigger improvements for agentic types of workflows with Sonnet 3.7, with the new Gemini, with GPT 4.1, even 03, 04 mini. Like, we've had a lot of really good models that were not tested here, so take that with a grain of salt. I think one of the interesting things here was the browser use is the place where a lot of these tasks fell down. And that is an area where if you are trying to replicate the work that a user does, of course a model needs to be really good at using the browser. And I think I've seen this in my own personal experience, AIs are really bad at using browsers. Like, this should be something that is better than it is. It's a little unintuitive to me that for something that is so important, we have yet to see excellent browser use from a frontier model, from a core lab. There's been a lot of interesting startups doing some good things there, but the models themselves are still pretty bad at using browsers. And I think that's really kind of interesting. And I think but just in general, I think it's a pretty interesting study. I don't know, Jared, did you have any good takeaways from that?
I think honestly, my big takeaway is 25% seemed pretty good to me.
Well,
Like
yeah, that's
based on
true.
my experience,
Yeah,
and yeah, that seems solid.
yeah.
Like, uh, look, I think first of all, I thought that when it renamed somebody because it couldn't find them, that is A, hilarious, but B, to anyone who is regularly touching these models and using them, that should sound so familiar
Hmm.
that it's like, yeah, of course it did that. I mean, it does that in my code all the time, where it's just like, well, I can't find this function, or like it doesn't seem to work. So instead, what I'm going to do is just this completely bizarre orthogonal thing that no human being would ever do, but is like kind of a bit of a cheat, right? To like get across the finish line. Because now it can say it did it, even though it fully didn't do it, right? So, yeah, I thought those are kind of my two first thoughts. Was it just felt, like I was surprised at 25%. I thought that was actually pretty decent. And I think the browser thing is right on. Something I often think about is I think when we think about like the agentic use of browsers, right? Like almost all these things use these multimodal agents, right? Which they literally look at the screen, right? They take an image of the screen, they look at that, and then they make decisions based on it. And I think something that is a little bit counterintuitive, right, is that um, giving it an image and the fact that these models have the image to work with does not imply that they have a visual representation in the same way that like a human would, right? They don't, see quote unquote in the same way that people see. There's any number of prompts that you can play around with to find that this is the case. It's been well demonstrated in the research at this point that like visual reasoning, for example, is substantially worse than pure reasoning, right? That like if you give them a picture of like one of those puzzles. It's like, oh, there's a ball on a table, and the table is on the ladder, and then the ladder is the ball above or below the ladder. Like they just can't do it. They cannot figure it out, and they do way worse on the visual side. So it's sort of unsurprising to me that they would do so poorly on browser automation tasks. And all the state of the art browser automation stuff, if you look, where people seem to have done really well in browser automation is when they augment the images with additional text layer information that can give away some of the details of what's in the picture, because this stuff is not natively well understood by the models in the way that you would kind of intuitively think that it is, right? It just isn't. So I don't know. I thought it was great research. CMU, obviously, great university. They did a good job doing it, but yeah, I guess we'll see. Yeah, I could imagine doing that study again in 2 years and it being passable, but it seems like it's still pretty early days.
Yeah, definitely.
And one thing that's interesting about this too is, I like that the benchmark is trying to simulate like real work. And I saw an interesting observation from Andres Carpathy. I can never pronounce his name right. But anyway, he tweeted a really interesting thing, basically saying, "Hey, I coded this app the other day, and I was able to code, but actually I spent so much of my time just going to websites and like configuring things and setting things up and signing in and creating accounts and getting all the billing and all." He's like, yes, the coding part I can do, but it's all this extra stuff that is taking actually most of my time nowadays. And I think that's an interesting thing that we're going to start to see much more acceleration in. You're already starting to see this, like Anthropic released their ability to do like remote MCP stuff. I forget the name that they called it. There's a new approach that's going to help to automate some of those things. But I'm seeing that myself too. I'm building this application, and it uses it's looking at email, and so it uses Google, and so I'm like spending all my time dealing with like, the URI mismatch and the OAuth setup, and the consent screen isn't quite right, and the tester, but like all this stuff that's really annoying. And there's just this whole level of busy work, grunt work types of things that don't require a huge amount of intelligence to do, but they do require authentication. They require knowledge of these tools, up-to-date knowledge, right? Not 6 months ago, because all these things change, right? So I think there's something really interesting there that we're going to start to see over the next 6 to 12 months of work to kind of automate some of those things. I think that's going to have a really big impact in a way that might be a little bit surprising to people.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think that, I think there's going to be kind of some pressure on, I don't know, platforms and SaaSes and just general architectural patterns to start to push more towards like consolidated platforms, right? Where you don't need to do all of that, and you can get more out of single tools. We'll see. It feels like right now there's just such a huge number of tools that you have to sign up for to be useful, and agents are no exception, right? So it'll be really interesting to see what kind of pressure that creates in the market.
Yeah, I think we talked about a few trends there that we've been thinking about internally. One is like, could there be a place where you just find all the agents and you kind of know their skills and you can evaluate and use them? And then in the future, could there be this layer that you don't have to actually interact and sign up for these things, but you can, have something that signs up on your behalf? So, but I think it is interesting, the browser use of how much of our work comes from the browser and navigating and knowing it. And Kevin, you and I had worked on that like quick proof of concept some time ago. We were like, oh, browser use could be really good for this. Like we're trying to automate some of the tasks of someone relatively junior to free up their mind space for higher level things. And what you kind of realize is it's better than RPA, but not significantly. Like you do have to label parts of the browser. And then the minute it diverges, which it naturally does for every task, like generally no task is the same, it really struggles. And there was one observation in the study where like the agent needed to click out of a pop-up and it couldn't figure out how to do that, probably because that's a variation that it hadn't captured. And so I think the part about browser use making this challenging is a really, really good insight. And maybe like as it gets better, you'd see pretty big jumps in this.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, this is yet another victory for the thought that if you're building something today, right? Obviously, this can't be true for legacy apps, but if you're building something today and you want to make it amenable to agents, don't build it in such a way that it's like, oh, a human does this, and then look, we'll make an agent that can do the human workflow. To go the other way, right? Like think about it, agent first, like how would I make this amenable to an agent using it, which is not pictures and clicking in browsers and whatever. And then how can I make sure that the agent has a robust way to access the tooling, and then, worry about how to create another interface that humans can use, right? I think that like agent human collaboration, at least in the near term, is going to look best when it's built that way, right?
Yeah, well, this is somewhat of a good transition to the next topic when we're talking about like models somewhat hallucinating or renaming these users as they want. But Kevin, I know, we've been playing around with O3 as part of we've been building out this internal tool, trying to upgrade it to the latest models. It's been super interesting to see how it worked on O3 compared to what it was previously on, which was O1. So yeah, really want to hear your thoughts around what you experienced, what you observed.
Yeah. So the backstory here is, we've been building this internal tool that helps us come up with and brainstorm new startup ideas. And so we have this very detailed prompt where we have this whole rubric-based system. We can dynamically adjust it on the fly. But at the end of the day, basically the idea is we're asking the model, hey, think deeply about this problem and come up with a really good startup idea and explain it, right? Tell us why it's good. Market size, give us a little bit of a roadmap, things like that. And so we built this originally with O1 back in December. And it was surprisingly good when we gave it the rubric to actually think through. And we basically said, keep thinking until you reach, the top score on each one of these categories of this rubric. It worked really well. We thought, okay, if it works great with O1, just wait until we add it to O3. It's going to be amazing, right? So O3 finally comes out. I finally get around to changing the text and getting it up there. And we roll this out and I start testing it and I realized like it's going too far, because what it started to do is, instead of the roadmap being kind of this high level, like, oh yeah, year one, we're going to hit, 10 million in ARR and then we're going to get to 100 million by year 5. Just kind of light, like, okay, this is what could happen. It started going over the top and saying like, oh, we're going to hit 3.71 million within month 7. And then we're going to hire the senior director of the NSA to come and be our CEO. And then we're going to hit 72 million. And it was like just going crazy with these details. I mean, it sounded great, right? But it was just hallucinating, just going crazy, trying to convince me that this was an amazing idea, using false precision as a tool. And knowing that humans, when they see a number like 72.1, are going to be much more likely to trust that than if they see 100 million. So we really had to work around it. I know, Jared, I don't know if you want to talk about this a little bit, but I asked Jared, I'm like, what do we do here? Like, what were some of your thoughts and what were some of the suggestions you had about taming it? Because we were able to tame it to some degree. And I'm curious to hear from Shilpa if we did a good job. But first, Jared, what did we do?
Yeah. So the trick is, right, that like what you and I kind of were thinking through is that with all the models up to this point, right, like the approach has always been in prompt engineering that you sort of need to say, don't do this, don't do that, never do this. And what I have been finding as I've been using O3 and O1 to a lesser extent, and actually our colleague Anthony wrote a nice article about this a little while ago. That's on the PSL blog. But these the O models in particular, O1, O3, presumably O4, they have a little bit of a defiant streak, right? They don't like to be told what not to do. They seem to like want to work around that and sort of try to solve the problem, not quite adversarially, but they don't want you telling them what to do. So the intuition was, well, what if instead of telling it what not to do, we tell it what we would like for it to do? Like what does a good answer look like? Who's your audience, more or less, right? Because if it's going to try to convince whoever it thinks is on the other end, maybe just getting really explicit about what the audience is and what's going to make them happy and unhappy would give better results. So that's what we did. We sort of massaged the prompt to be a little bit more telling it who it's trying to convince instead of what not to do. And it seemed to really improve the output, which is a little spooky as I say that out loud. I don't know how I feel about that. I'm curious, like, how did we do? Like,
yeah, it was interesting because Kevin sent me the updated prompts. I was like, okay, I know what it's going in. And there was like, some detail of what it should do. But funnily enough, it still was hallucinating. It was still doing like making up like, oh, we have like 2 design partners on these ideas. We've done this pilot and we got this percentage bump. And I think this is one where it's just really hard to, how do you tell it not to do any of that? Then you become like everything, like all encompassing, like don't do X. And that's, I think, really hard. So I think it was interesting to me that it was hallucinating. What I did appreciate, and I know you guys were trying to up level it a bit, but honestly, the level of detail when it's not hallucinating is so much better than O1. Like the way it analyzed like TAM, competitive landscape, like even like founder profiles, I was like, oh yeah, this is really good. This is what I would want in my next level of analysis. But yeah, the hallucination was surprising. I think the other thing that I found interesting compared to O1 is that the ability to synthesize all of these details was not as good. Like, each component would be crazy detailed. And then the top part, I'd be like, oh, this is different than what I'm reading. I just feel like O1 was very good at synthesis. And so maybe this is all just prompts probably, and it'll get better as we get more familiar with O3. But yeah, super interesting. You guys did a good job. I don't want to say you didn't. It's
No,
just
this
like,
is good.
wow, limitations are kind of the way this model works. And I'll say the other funny thing, I know Kevin, you and I were pinging about this, but the cool thing about when we were using O1 in our rubric is ideas came out really good. Like you try to force them to A+ across like our several criteria. And it was really creative ideas, I'd have to say. O3, surprisingly not as good. And I don't know if it's the way we prompted, but it felt a little bit more like, oh yeah, if I were just kind of hanging around, I probably could have come up with this. So, there were some interesting insights. I think analysis was like step change. I was super interested in that. And there's probably some tweaking we have to do on this like hallucination piece. So yeah, but still an improvement, guys.
Yeah.
It's so
It's
interesting
interesting.
though. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I was gonna say it's so interesting to me that like, this is one of the hard problems of building with AI is what's the right, how do you do evals for comes
Hmm.
up with a creative and yet very good and compelling idea, right? This is such a nebulous like thing. Um, and also this idea that, you know, just because a model scores 10% better on a benchmark doesn't mean you just drop it in and it's automatically going to be 10% better in your app. You really have to understand the nuances and the personalities of these models. Like, what a weird thing to be thinking about as an engineer, right? It's like, oh, this one's more creative. Oh, be careful of this one. It might lie to you in subtle ways. Like, it's like you need to have like an EQ for like these models, which is so weird.
So weird.
But
Yeah.
it's just kind of fun. But I appreciate you sort of vibe checking it there, Shilpa, and we'll just have to keep doing that because honestly, I think that's one of the best ways to evaluate this. And this is another area where getting better at evals. I'm sure that you could set up some evals to at least get closer here, but man, this is such a hard problem, and I'm sure we're not alone in this.
Yeah. I mean, and it's funny because as you say that, I'm like, yeah, probably for some of it, but sitting here right now, I don't know how I could construct a robust eval that would be able to tell the difference between it saying 72.1 billion at month 7 versus we expect that the total TAM is somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 billion and we hope to be approaching whatever percent of TAM at you know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
there's there's a qualitative difference that to a human jumps out. It's immediately obvious that like one of these feels, for lack of a better term, like bullshit, and the other one doesn't.
Yep.
And I don't know how to construct an eval that would say yes, no, right? Like, it's really, really challenging. And so to your point, Kevin, I think having a really robust sort of, EQ for how this model is going to respond to requests, I think that's going to be really important. Because, these are hallucinations, like you're using the term hallucinations. And yes, they are that, but these are different hallucinations than the kind that you would get from a 4.0 or Claude 3.5 or whatever, right? Those hallucinations tend to be a little bit more like they're saying things that aren't true or aren't grounded in the data that it has available to it. And that's okay, that's sort of to be, but we've all come to expect that to some extent. These are the kinds of hallucinations where it feels like it is choosing to include information that is false in order to achieve a goal.
Yes.
I think it's different. Like it seems similar and it rhymes, but it's different somehow. And I think it has implications for how you design with them, right?
Yeah, which makes it so hard to catch too. Like especially in our case, where we're trying to come up with these ideas, might be out of our expertise, especially with founders. Like I was looking at an environmental or like carbon idea yesterday. I have no idea about this space. And I was like, oh yeah, this makes sense. But now I have to sense check everything. And these are like overarching trends that it's synthesizing. It could have just made it all up to convince me this was a good idea that a VC should invest in. So yeah, it's really hard. And you do need a person, but I think what I'm realizing, at least for our case, is you need someone with expertise who spends like probably an hour or two checking a single output to figure out, was this accurate? So yeah, I think very challenging with the current models are and how we're using them more particularly.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because it also is like, I feel like there's that question with AI applications, which is you have to be careful that there's a fine line between helping a user and creating work for a user. And when you create work, it's usually the kind where I have to go check it. right? And with O3, I've occasionally been a little worried that like the work I have to do to go check it is I have to go get like a PhD
Yeah.
in whatever field in order to assess whether or not this claim is correct. And that's a really high bar, right? So I don't know. Interesting times. I don't quite know what to make of all this right now. Is O3 considered harmful? I don't know. It's really powerful. It's really great, but you got to be careful.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just
I'll
yeah, go
include a
ahead.
link to Anthony's blog post. Maybe we should get him on the pod next time because
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good
he
idea.
had some really good thoughts very, very early on that are just starting to come true. And we all kind of knew at the time, like, this is something people are going to be talking about in 6 months. And here we are, like 5 months later, and people are starting to talk about it. But he's got some really good actual mitigation techniques and things in there too that I can share. So yeah.
And I think maybe like going back to our prior podcast episode where we talked about use cases and kind of seeing a shift more with AI to some of these like interpersonal coaching or even like therapy use cases. This is where something like this kind of hallucination can be particularly, I would say, dangerous actually, in the sense of like I'm trying to get help or I'm trying to share some mental health things and you don't actually know what the incentives are and where it could be trying to persuade you. And it could, that's definitely a bit scary with how people are starting to use AI. And I know this actually is a good lead in for something you were talking about with us, Jared, on leaderboard illusions. So you want to kind of explain a bit more about what that was and your thoughts?
Yeah, there was a really great paper that came out. I think I came across it, I don't know, yesterday, the day before yesterday. And effectively, this paper was going and looking at, it was published by some folks who have submitted a bunch of, models to open weight models to leaderboards. And what they were looking at was this hypothesis that what was happening in leaderboards is that we're seeing the effects of Goodhart's law, like front and center. And if you're not familiar, Goodhart's law is this idea that as soon as a metric becomes an output rather than something that you're, just sort of measuring, that it ceases to be a good metric, right? Another way to think about it is, imagine that you have a benchmark and everybody's trying to maximize the benchmark. Well, the benchmark doesn't actually tell you anything anymore about whether or not the submissions are good. They're telling you how good they are at understanding how to drive that benchmark, right? So what these researchers sort of posit, and what I think there's some good evidence for is that you can imagine sort of if you're a huge model provider, that you can train, you don't train one whatever Llama 3 or Claude 3.5 or O1. You train a lot of them, right? And you're looking for you get these different characteristics in the different training runs, right? And this is well known. This happens all the time. This is very standard stuff. But there's nothing stopping you, and this is like for machine learning people, they do this all the time, right? You train it, you sort of like have 10 different 10 different models that you've trained. Sometimes those are thought of as different checkpoints, different epochs, whatever. And you're kind of checking like at each point, like how does it do against my benchmarks? And you look, there's nothing stopping you. This is not considered great practice, but nothing stopping you from just cherry picking the best one, right?
Mm.
Like, oh, this one, it turns out that I trained 5 different versions and version 3 is 3 points better than, version 1, just because randomness, right? I just got lucky. And so, great, that's the one I'm going to take, and I'm going to use that one. This is like a cousin of what's been called the lottery ticket hypothesis in the research, and I kind of, which I love so much. But the upshot is that what the researchers are saying is, if this all is true, there's not good reason to believe that that improving performance on leaderboards makes for meaningful improvement in real user cases, right? And there's some of this that I think people have reported, and certainly I have experienced. I'd be really curious for your take here too, Kevin. But like for me, I think, if you find 5 people who use AI every day, you will get somewhere between 7 and 10 opinions on whether or not, X model is better at Y task than its predecessor or this other model, despite the fact that they may be at dramatically different positions in the leaderboard. I was just reading someone last night saying, I don't use Claude 3.7, I use Claude 3.5 because it's just objectively better at everything I need. Okay, well, that's not what the leaderboard says, and that's not been my experience, but at the same time, I buy it. So I don't know. I mean, what do you think, Evan? What's your take?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think this whole I'm glad that a study was done for this, because this totally checks out with a feeling I've had for a while, which is specifically these LLM Arena results feel off. And, you see things like some of the earlier Gemini checkpoints were really high versus some of the like Sonnet 3.5 is a good example where sort of famously like very low scoring on LM Arena, and yet in my mind is one of the best models to have come out
for sure
in the past year. And also to your point, like I think it's sort of a known secret in the industry that like Sonnet 3.5, there's Anthropic's amazing research and done a lot of work. Also got a really lucky roll of the dice on that one, because that model is just shockingly good, and not for any necessarily good technical reasons besides like it's just good. Right? And that's a thing. And we need, that's just part of how this stuff works. It's so funny. But I also think the other thing with the LM Arena that's really interesting is it does start to pull in biases for just the benchmark, which is you show a person two things of text and they just click on a box to say which one's better. And we've reached a point where honestly, like what you're seeing is better is often like lists or tables or a bunch of emojis and a bunch of stuff. It's actually detrimental to what I actually want day to day with the model, which is don't give me a ton of emojis. Don't be really verbose with a bunch of check. Just give me my answer and either make it short or long or whatever it needs to be. But it's like this whole thing in like professional barbecue. I'm not a professional barbecuist at all, but I love watching barbecue TV. This is like a little known fact about me. And one trick that a professional barbecue person will do is you get one bite. And so they overload it with salt and the sauce and the spice. And yes, it's great for the one bite, but you would never serve that to somebody because they would take 3 bites and be like, this is terrible. And you're kind of seeing that same approach here where model providers, they're going off the benchmark, and yet they're producing a rib that is way too salty to wrap that metaphor up.
Right.
Yeah,
this is a good time, I think, to just mention that, if you don't know, Kevin is from Michigan. I'm from Kansas. Right. Like, so if you're from the heartland, right, you start to understand that barbecue is an analogy for almost everything in life. And it's the right lens for virtually every problem that you come across.
Yes.
Like you see something new and interesting on the whiteboard, you need to be thinking about sauce. Like you need to be thinking about, should you miss or not? These are questions. Okay. And that's how you should think about it.
That is not where I was expecting you to go, Jared. But I have to say, love the analogy. I'm from Maryland, so
okay,
not the heartland, it seems, and not very barbecue forward, I suppose.
I just don't think crabs can teach you a lot about life.
No,
I just don't. But yeah, no, I think you're on there, Kevin. I think it's like there's good reason, especially right now. It's like feels like every week a different provider is just dunking on everybody else, right? Like, yeah, okay, OpenAI comes out and says, check it out, O4 Mini, this thing's insane. And then Qwen 3 drops like a crazy model that is just like, oh my God, it's 200 billion parameter model and it's incredibly good. Anthropic is just like, hey, guess what? That's nice, but how about integrating with literally every tool? And now you can just plug Claude Desktop into Zapier and GitHub and your calendar and everything else you could ever want. How about that? I mean, next week it's going to be something else. And so the pressure, I think, to get to the top of the leaderboard, right, and to ship some crazy new feature is bigger than ever. And so it shouldn't surprise us in some way that like we've handed these big companies a way to demonstrate relevance, demonstrate kind of dominance in the field, it shouldn't surprise anybody that they're trying to maximize it, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I think from like if from PSL's perspective, we're always trying to build companies, and it's an interesting challenge where we would want our company's users or customers to get the best experience, and for that use case, have the best model available. But if there's actually, it's kind of fuzzy, like what actually is the best model? Like, how do you guys think about now that, we're talking about the leaderboard not being that helpful? And we talked previously about like O3 not working great for something, O1 better for something else. How do you guys think about actually knowing or trying to figure out which of the models at any point in time are good for a specific use case?
Trial and error. I mean, that's the best and only answer I have. But you're right. It's getting so hard nowadays because there are so many good choices. It used to be like you had 4.0 or even GPT-4 is really expensive, but it was good. And then you had like Gemini had a big context window, was kind of not so great. And then you had Llama if you wanted to do open source or local. Now, my gosh, there's a bunch of really great models, and they're converging too. There's still models that are slightly better, but they're really getting specialized and getting fragmented and kind of nuanced, and it's becoming harder and harder and harder to make that decision. At the same time, maybe the decision isn't as important now as it used to be because they're all like pretty good, and you're going to get something that's like, this might just be a prompt thing. Maybe the model's not, but it's getting me most of the way there, so it's like just fine. But I don't know. I don't have a good answer there.
I'm not sure I have a better one. I think, I would say, the way I think about this is I try to think about, can I outline the contours of the problem? Like, what kind of a problem is it? Do I need something that's going to talk to a person? Like, if it's talking to a person, I'm going to reach for Claude because it's just sort of broadly understood to be the most empathetic kind of model. It's the most human. It's good at communicating. Is it a planning problem? Great. Give me the O series, right? Is it a problem where I need some like analysis on a large corpus? Well, Gemini, like not even close, right? Give me a break. And then the other dimension, I think, is kind of budget, right? It's definitely the case, as Kevin observes, that a lot of these models are effectively converging, right, in terms of their performance, broadly speaking. But it is also true that at a price point wise, there's not a lot of convergence happening. That like there are still fairly different. Like if you go look at like the SWE agent, like their benchmarks, right? They have these open like SWE benchmarks, right? You can see that like they also show, okay, great. So for O1 to achieve this percent, how much money did it spend? For O3 to achieve that percent, how much money did it spend? What I find really shocking is when I look at that, number one right now I think is O3. Number 3 is Flash 2.5, which is okay, sure. They're a 10x cost difference, right? So the number one model cost $60 some to solve this suite. Gemini 2.5 costs $6, and they're like just neck and neck in terms of performance. And I'm willing to bet that on most tasks, you're not going to notice the difference, right? In terms of the actual output. So I think that's the other thing to consider is, what's my budget? Am I willing to blow a ton of cash? If so, great. Like, go OpenAI. Like their models are very expensive, but quite good. But for a little, like quite a bit less money, you can get a little less performance, maybe. But on most tasks, I think you can do pretty well. And then if you need something private, then great, get yourself a local model. Like the Quen series is really they're punching way above their weight class and are really impressive. So that's another thing to consider.
Yeah, I really like your framework, Jared. It's helpful to see for specific problems what you actually find is helpful, and then like you can break up almost entire products into that, so you know which model to go to. On the point of local models, so we talked about it in a few prior episodes, and I know the ginormous Apple devices have come in. I've seen them on your desk.
Yes.
Yeah, Jared, you've been experimenting a bit. Tell us what you've been finding.
Okay, so yesterday, I finally got back, in front of my desk after being out for a while, um, recovering from an injury, and so I very eagerly, got this huge like cinder block computer, kind of like hooked up and running, and immediately I had just read all the kind of model card for Quen 235B, which is a big model, right? This thing is a honker, but like it should fit. It should be able to run. So I, fired up Olama. I told it I want to run, Quen 235B, A22B, and 162 gigs of just the model getting downloaded, and then it ran. And I was talking to it and getting it to do stuff, and it's incredibly fast actually, and really, really good. And so I'm really excited, right? I think this is very cool to be able to run these locally at a pretty high rate of token output. And with these models right now, at least on all the benchmarks, this model is crushing O1 in terms of its performance across most of the benchmarks, including coding. So I think it's kind of cool to imagine like maybe there's a world where if you have access to the hardware that is expensive today but won't be expensive tomorrow, your cursor or your whatever agent you want to run could be local.
Love it.
That's pretty
Can't
cool.
wait. I can't wait this afternoon. I gotta
Fire it up. It's amazing.
Yep.
It's really, really cool. It's really cool.
Well, stay tuned for more insights as we keep testing them. Well, we're coming up on time, so as always, love hearing the weekend plans. Kevin, what is up for you this weekend?
So not much this weekend, but I want to say my son, has been really into football cards lately. This is his big thing. So I'm sure I'm gonna have more trips here. But he every night I come home and he's like, "Dad, take me to Fred Meyer. I want to get football cards." I feel like every Fred Meyer I go to in town is out of football cards, but like this is our tradition. So we got a Fred Meyer last night. Show up, of course they're completely out, and my poor son, he's 10 years old. He's disappointed, and we're walking out, and the guy at the Fred Meyer says, "Hey, you guys looking for cards?" And we're like, "Yeah, sorry, they're out." He's like, "Oh, let me help you out here." And he reaches behind the counter. This is Fred Meyer, right? This is just like this guy from Fred. This isn't like a mom and pop shop. He pulls out this box of like all these random Pokemon cards. And I have my son and my daughter, and he's like, "Here." He hands us like a stack of 100 cards. And I'm looking at him like, am I supposed to pay for this? I think it's free. And then he's like, well, hold on. And then he goes in the back again and he pulls out like these card holder, like these, things. And these are like actually like in a pack. And now I'm like, what is that?
What
Like
is going on?
a store employee's just giving me stuff for free. Like this is so nice. And also I'm going to get out of here as fast as I can so I don't get like cause some sting operation or something. But anyway, no, walk out the door. It's great. So random employee at Fred Meyer, I really appreciate that. Was such a nice thing to do. So thank you for listening. Let me know. I'll throw like 30 minutes of prompt engineering help your way or something. But yeah, thank you.
Wow, what a story. And your lucky kids. That's amazing.
I know. Yes. They were very happy.
Jared, what's up for you?
Well, I don't know. Like I mentioned, I'm kind of still recovering from this injury, and so I'm gonna do the thing that I think is probably hardest for me to do, which is just behave myself and not go too hard on being able to move around a lot more than I have been in the last few weeks. So I'm gonna try to pick off a few projects around the house that I feel like are approachable without getting myself in trouble. So yeah, nothing concrete. Probably doing a little birthday present shopping. My partner's birthday is coming up. Maybe do a little coding, just keep myself out of trouble. How about you, Shilpa?
Yeah. So this weekend, I'm trying to convince my husband to go to Tulip Town. So the Tulip Festival usually ends end of April, but they kept it open because the tulips are still, I guess, existing as flowers. But the last time, so we last went, I think it was like 4 years ago, and we ended up sitting in like 4 hours of traffic one way
Yes.
because there's only one entrance in and out.
Right?
Yes.
This is my experience with this. Yes.
Yeah, so he's scarred. So he's like, no, I don't want to. So I'm hoping I can convince him to go before opening tomorrow and just like hit it early and get back before the traffic gets crazy. But
Nice.
yeah, I have to let you guys know if he's down for it, and hopefully it takes us like not 4 hours one way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, great. Thank you all for listening. Really excited that we can share these thoughts with you, and we will be back soon.